So what is going on, everyone? This is Fabi here, and today we've got the comparison between four generations of iPads. Here is the iPad 1, here's the iPad 2, here is the iPad 3, and here is the brand new iPad 5 or iPad Air. So the first test we are going to run is Geekbench 3. Now, unfortunately, the iPad 1 is not capable of running Geekbench 3 because it needs to run iOS 7, and only these three devices will run it. But as a point of reference, I can tell you guys that this gets about half the score of the iPad 2, if that is of any help. So we are going to power up Geekbench 3 on these devices, and we are going to run the test. As you guys may know, this is a CPU test. It doesn't really test the ability of the GPU at all, so we will be able to see what the CPU performs like. So now, as you can see, the results came in, and the iPad 2 and the iPad 3 scored about the same at about 500 points, whereas the iPhone, or the iPad Air rather, just blew them out of the water at with a score of 2700 almost. Now, you might be wondering why the iPad 2 and the iPad 3 score about the same, and the reason is because the CPU behind them is basically the same other than the GPU, and this test doesn't really put the GPU at stress at all. Now, the second test we are going to run is called 3D Mark. Now, this was released on iOS about 2 months ago, and unfortunately it doesn't run on the iPad 1 either. So let's launch it on all of these devices that can run it actually, and let's see which one will be able to get the highest score. I think we're going to run the Ice Storm Unlimited because that's what I found to be the most conclusive test of them all. So let's start them all at the same time or around the same time and see which one will finish the first. And I failed at launching all of these three. So here we go. The results came in, and as you can see, the iPad 2 scored about twice as bad as the iPad 3, about 2,600 points, whereas the iPad 3 scored it at 400 or 4,100, and the iPad Air completely dwarfed them out of the water with a score of about 15,000 points. The next test we are going to run is called SunSpider, which is basically a JavaScript test that tests the performance of the browser. And I know I said testing or tests a lot of times, but it doesn't matter. So here we are going to delete all of the cache and every single thing that could slow down these devices during the test, so we can make sure that they're all on a level playing field. So now that we've got SunSpider loaded up on all of these devices, I want to take a short break and talk about the screen and the colors of each and every device. The iPad 3 and the iPad Air, in my opinion, look the best, while the iPad 2 is kind of a bit more vibrant, and it just makes colors seem a little bit more warm. But these devices seem to represent the colors most correctly, I would say. If you like a more saturated device or a more saturated screen, I would say that the iPad 2 has the most saturated screen. So now we are going to run the tests. It doesn't really matter which one I press the first. What you do need to take in mind, or to keep in mind, is the fact that, and it asks me which version to run. We are going to run the 1.0.2 version, and that's going to be that. So if you guys want to compare your tests or compare your scores with our scores, you're going to be able to do that. Something that I do want to say is the fact that the lower the score, the better, so just keep that in mind. And of course, the iPad 1 was the last one to finish. We've got a score of 2,841 milliseconds, which is the worst of them all. As I said, remember that the lower the score, the better. Here on the iPad 2, we've got a score of 1,265. Here on the iPad 3, we've got a score of 1,280. Whereas here on the iPad Air, we've got a score of 386 milliseconds. So I thought it would be interesting to load up a few apps that most of you guys most likely use on a daily basis, just because I think that in real life tests are the most important. So here we've got test apps. We are going to open up Flipboard, YouTube, IMDb, and Twitter on all of these devices and see which one is the fastest. And I think I'm going to need the help of my friend over here to load them up at the same time. First app we are going to launch is Flipboard. 3, 2, 1, go. iPad Air was the fastest, iPad 3 was second, iPad 2 came in close after the iPad 3, and iPad 1 was, of course, the slowest. Now we are going to launch the YouTube app, but I couldn't load the YouTube app that is available on the App Store on the iPad 1 because it requires iOS 6 or later, and I can't get iOS 6 on my iPad 1. So we are going to use the default iPad iOS 5 YouTube app on this. 3, 2, 1. This was honestly a shock for me because the default iOS 5 YouTube app was so much faster than all of these apps on that Google uploaded on the App Store. The iPad 1 was the fastest, followed by the iPad Air, then the iPad 2, and the slowest was the iPad 3 in this test. Now we are going to launch IMDb. 3, 2, 1. The iPad Air was again the fastest. Over here we've got the iPad 3, which came in second. Over here the iPad 2 came in third, and the iPad 1 was the slowest. Now we are going to launch up Twitter. 3, 2, 1. Again, the iPad Air was the fastest, followed in by the iPad 2, and the iPad 3 was the third one, and the iPad 1 was, of course, the slowest. Talking about the design of these iPads, as you can see, with each and every generation, they changed the design a little bit. Over here, the iPad 1 was very bulky. Over here, the iPad 2 was the slimmest up until the iPad Air, and the iPad 3 and the iPad 4 were, of course, larger or thicker than the iPad 2. As you can see, the bezels of the iPad 1, 2, 3, all the way up to the 4th generation are very thick, and they are sort of intrusive when you want to watch a movie. On the iPad Air, that is a problem that was fixed because the bezels are the same as on the iPad mini, which is really nice when you're watching a movie or when you're watching a YouTube video or when you're playing a game because it makes that experience that much more immersive. Now that we're talking about the backs of all of these iPads, you can see that the iPad 1 was a little bit bulkier and it was a little bit rounded, so it really didn't sit flat on the table, which was a downside. Over here with the iPad 2, we've got the addition of the camera. It was only a 0.7 megapixel shooter, but it did the job of capturing pictures and filming 720p video. Over here on the iPad 3 and iPad 5, we've got a 5 megapixel shooter that is able to shoot 1080p videos. And over here on my iPad 3, you can see we've got the black bar, which is for 3G and GPS because this is the LTE model. If you're interested in buying any of these iPads, the iPad 2 and the iPad 5 or the iPad Air are obviously still on sale. The iPad 3 and iPad 4 and unfortunately the iPad 1 are not on sale anymore. But if you want to buy an iPad 1, I can give it for you for about, I guess, $200. So if you want a good deal, just contact me on YouTube. The iPad Air is on sale for about $500, the cheapest model, 16GB Wi-Fi model, and the iPad 2 is at $399 for the Wi-Fi 16GB model. Now, if you want some advice, I would tell you guys not to buy the iPad 2 because it is very expensive at this point in time. You can just get the iPad mini 2 for $399, which has the A7 processor, the Retina display, 1GB of RAM, and so much more for the same price, and it really is a much better deal. So now that we've finished talking about all these tests, I would like to take a second and talk about the specs of each and every device. Over here on the left side, we've got the iPad 1, which has only the Apple A4 chip, which is a single-core 1 GHz chip, and it's very slow. It also only has 256 megabytes of RAM. Over here, we also have the GPU that is the Power SGX 535, which is very slow for today's standards. Over here on the iPad 2, we've got the dual-core Apple A5 chip, clocked in at 1 GHz. With 512 megabytes of RAM, along with the Power SGX 543 MP2, which means it's a dual-core GPU. Over here on the iPad 3, we've got an Apple A5X this time, which is the same CPU as the iPad 2. It still has the 1 GHz dual-core CPU, but now it has 1 GB of RAM and a quad-core Power SGX Power SGX 543 MP4, which stands for quad-core. Over here on the right side, we've got the iPad Air, which has the Apple A7 chip, which is still a dual-core 1.3 gigahertz, this time 64-bit enabled chip that is supposedly twice as fast as the iPad 4 A6 chip, and it also has the Power SGX 600 series graphics, which is much better, much faster, and much stronger in general. And it also has 1 gigabyte of RAM again, which is not a step upwards from the last two generations. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to press the like button. It really did take a lot of time for me to film this and to edit this along with my friend Antonio Dennis, so make sure to check out his channel and subscribe to both mine and his channel. Like this video, share with your friends on Facebook and on Twitter, and stay tuned for more content. Peace out, guys. Peace. Have an awesome day. Here's my setup. Ooh, over there.